Okay, in this session we're going to talk about transferring data from P6 into TILOS. So here I've got a small P6 program with a number of activities, and here I've got an empty TILOS file waiting to accept those activities, and the first thing we need to discuss are data field mapping. So there's a series of data fields are obviously in P6, such as the start and end dates, the description, the activity ID. All of those you don't have to define where you go, but there are extra information that you don't normally have in P6 for a linear project, and the first two are obviously the start and end distance value, the chainage of each activity. So we've got to find a home for those, and so in P6 I have created a user field for activities that I've got a TILOS word before them, but I've got one called startcha and endcha. It doesn't matter what you call them, but of course you have to be consistent. So I've created two columns, start change, end change. I populated those with some data. If there's nothing in them, it'll be 0. And whilst we're looking at user fields, I've also got one for the TILOS subproject ID. Normally you wouldn't need this unless you're going to have more than one subproject, and a subproject in TILOS is a side road or a branch line, or the up line of a railway and the down line of a railway to another subproject, or one leg of the eastbound of a tunnel is one subproject, the westbound of a tunnel is another subproject. If you only got one subproject, you don't need this value. The other thing I've got is I've got a quantity field where I can put the amount of work that is in the quantity field in TILOS. And the last thing I've got as a user field is a user field where I'm going to designate in TILOS if I do want this information to be sent to TILOS, because I might in P6 have a whole design and procurement program before the construction program, and it's inappropriate, or there's no particular sense because it's not linear for the design and procurement. So we need those user fields. But the other thing we need, and we can use, are activity code libraries. So we're going to use activity codes in this sense for two things: for task templates and for layers. So I've created this library, and it is hierarchical, and there's a value field and a description field, and so I've put all of those in one layout, which I've got for this particular project. So let's just recap on those data fields, so you can just take a moment to think about that. Obviously you can call them whatever you want. They're the names that I've put together. So let's have a look in TILOS where some of them go. So so obviously in TILOS, if I create an activity, if I create an activity, obviously by doing that, the start and end distance are populated, and that's where the start and end distance is going to go into. There's a calculation tab, and the quantity field here is where the information is going to be placed. The task template that I selected when I created the activity that you saw me create is shown here, and the way we define that in the library also needs a little bit of understanding. So if we have a look at that task template, so we double click on here. So if we look at the first tab, task template, it's got this task template ID, which is a path name. I can only edit this one here at this level because the parent, if it has a parent, in this case roadwork, is where I define the other one. So each of the children here have got essentially a path name. So if we just go back to P6 and look at the structure of that for a moment, because we have to mirror that in P6. And the whole reason for this is that the value field in P6 is limited, and so we have to find a mechanism for doing that. The description can be as long as you want. So here I've got an entry that's called, I put a value of RDW and a description of roadwork, and then I've made sub-entries which are just the part ID of the activity in TILOS. So you just got to make a matching library that mirrors that particular structure. So back to TILOS again, when we the other thing is the layer of the activity, so that's being set here through this drop down, and in P6 we're going to be using an activity code that is just flat. It hasn't got any nesting. It will only take the top level entries. So so hopefully we've got everything in position now to carry out the import and export. So if we're in P6, we need this information populated. The very minimum you need is the start and end. The very minimum that you need would be the start chainage, the end chainage, and the task template. Everything else is a nicety. I suggest you always need this because you're probably going to be bringing a subset of information out. But these three here are, as I say, a nicety. I did forget to show you where the sub-project is in TILOS. So in TILOS, in the library, under the project data section, there's a sub-project section. If you take the properties of that, you can see that there's an ID number here, sub-project ID. If you edit that, that's the value that you then need to populate in P6, but you only need that if you've got more than one sub-project. I'm just showing you here as an example. So we've got our schedule in P6, and we export from P6 in a P6 XML format. So so this is the proprietary format. That means it's their P6's own XML format. It's not the same as Microsoft Projects XML or Power Project XML. Or it's a tagged text file specific to P6. And with this project open, that's been selected, and this is the data file that we're going to export to. So I've set this up in advance just to save a little bit of time. And then we click on Finish. And P6 does its business. Now you can do several projects in one collection, and I've seen some very big files as a result of that, but it does function. So we've extracted that from P6. We're now in TILOS. We're now going to import it into TILOS, and we're going to choose, and this is only relevant in TILOS 9. We're going to choose this bottom option, Primavera P6 native XML format. So this is the one that you've got to choose in this particular circumstance. Then we're going to say next. What's the data file that we're going to import? So we've got to go away and find that, where we remember where we saved it to, and then we've got to give some information about where all these data fields are held. And if you remember, this is the information that we had, so it's going to be easy for me to copy and paste from that. So we do want to bring the links in, we do want to bring any resources in, and the default calendar that would be applied is one that will be created from the calendar in P6. We could bring cost allocations in. I'll talk a little bit more about WBS and categories later. So we want those two. This wouldn't be essential, but we're going to do it anyway. This is essential, so we can take the task template values from a user field or from activity codes that are global EPS level or project. We put them in a project level. In this particular case, we've called these TILOS task templates, and I'll talk about the sector profile as well at the end, but we're going to use layers again from a project activity code library, and again I'm going to paste that in just to save me doing that. We want to filter our import and import, so this can only be a user defined field at this stage. So and the value that will take any activity that's got a capital Y in the user defined field TILOS export. If it's got anything else, lowercase y, nothing, any other value, it will be ignored on import. So, but there's another tab here called additional field mapping. So here we also set up additional fields. So we click the add button. What's the TILOS data field? The start distance. If you remember, we're going to and we're going to both import and export that value. So again, we're going to choose the end distance. So copy my data field name, click here, and two other values that I'm going to put in here. If you remember, I've got the sub-project ID. So, and obviously the spelling of this and the capitalization has got to be exactly the same as it will be in both systems. And the final one is going to be the quantity. So you can see other values down here, numeric, preset fields, text fields, again integer fields, no decimal, and we could have a quantity unit as well as a quantity if we wanted to define that differently for different tasks. So and once I've set this up, I don't have to set it up again. It'll remember it the next time I import it. So that's all that I've got to do, and I click on finish, and there you go. It's created those activities. They've got logic links. They've got quantity factors. If we find one where we there we go. They brought that quantity factor in from P6. So it's created the calendars that we wanted, and it's applied those to the activities. So really very straightforward once you get this data field mapping set up. The other thing that I'll touch on is and you can export the information exactly the same way. So you can take it from TILOS to P6. If the ID exists in P6, it'll be updated. If it doesn't exist, it will be created. So the other two things to talk about are categories. So categories is the terminology used in TILOS for other activity code libraries in P6. So if you've got your activities in P6 organized, tagged with activity codes from different libraries, if you have this ticked, then it will also create those libraries in TILOS as categories, and it will make the assignments, and then you can filter, sort and group in TILOS by those same codes. And the other thing, of course, is if you have a WBS structure, which is essentially a sort of hierarchical numerical system, then you can bring that into TILOS as well, and they'll be allocated to individual activities, and again You can use that for filtering, grouping and sorting. So that's all of that information. The only final one is this thing here called sector profile. So it is possible to have a activity code library in P6 that defines both the start and end distance. So rather than having the start and end distance defined as user fields, you could have a single name essentially, and that name would have a preset, and that name would come from a library called whatever you want to call it, and that library would be mapped to a distance profile in TILOS. So in TILOS you can have sector profiles. If I make a new sector profile, the profile ID would have to be the name that we had before. We would have an entry where you had the name that you found in P6. You would say that, and this would define that this thing started at 4,500 and went to 6,500, and it must have this thing called a type, but it doesn't really matter. It wouldn't be really used in this particular sense, and you would have a lot of entries in here, and you can import them and export them from Excel to populate this in the first place. And so in P6 you can reference a start and end distance range by a single name. The disadvantage of that is that you have to have, you can't have one activity that goes from 4,500 to 9,000 and another one that does this. They've got to be in this discrete chunk. So it only works in a small number of linear projects, but it is a useful way of predefining the distance ranges. So they're all of the possibilities that you get with the data exchange between TILOS and P6. And I'll just leave that on screen for a moment so that you can see the full range of data fields. It's getting this mapping correct. So give it a go. If you've got any problems, contact the help desk or drop me an email. So and we could do the same things, the same sort of things that we've been doing. If you've got that particular module, we can do it for Trimble Business Center, Microsoft Project, and Asta Power Project in exactly the in a very similar way that you can see that we've done it with P6. So thank you for your time.